Hey everybody, this is your Daily Dose of Hope, and I'm Pastor Paul. I want to read you a story. I want to read you a story that if you didn't know the end of the story, it would be horrible. It would be awful. Maybe it would feel a little bit like for some of us today. But we know the end of this story, and I'm hoping in the end of this story we'll discover the end of our story. Right? Out of the darkness, out of the ugly, out of the horrible reality of what's going on in our country right now, that we'll see a hope. Let me read. It's from Luke chapter 23. I'm going to start in verse 50. Now there was a man named Joseph, a member of the council, a good and upright man, who had not consented to their decision and action. Their decision and action was to kill Jesus of Nazareth, to have him crucified, to send him over to the power of the Roman leaders, the emperor, Pontius Pilate, to hand him over to the occupying power and have him killed. Joseph of Arimathea didn't consent to that. He came from the Judean town of Arimathea, and he himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body. Then he took it down, wrapped it in linen cloth, and placed it in a tomb cut in the rock, one in which no one had yet been laid. It was a preparation day, and the Sabbath was about to begin. The women who had come with Jesus from Galilee followed Joseph and saw the tomb and how his body was laid in it. Then they went home and prepared spices and perfumes, but they rested on the Sabbath in obedience to the commandment. This is an awful story. If you're one of the followers of Jesus, in this moment you would have thought, they murdered him. They've killed him. They've buried him. He was crucified, dead, and buried. It was dark. This is the Saturday before Sunday. In a lot of ways, our country is in what I would say a dark moment. We have this horrible pandemic. We have people that we know, many of us, who have passed away because of the pandemic. We have massive racism, and we have massive protests. We have all kinds of things going on in our major cities. We have a discontent that's boiling under the surface in almost anywhere in the United States. There's this despair about, well, maybe if this one's elected, or if this one's elected, and then if this one's elected, then this one, and it's all of this stuff right under the surface. I was talking to someone even this morning who said, you know what I think the end result of all of this is? And they said these horrible words, civil war. They said, that's where I think we're headed. And then I added civil war maybe, or revival, because we know the end of the story. On the other side of this story, on the other side of this darkness, we know that there was a resurrection, the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. He was crucified, dead, and buried, and the third day he rose again from the dead. There's a principle that comes out of the Vietnam War. It was a principle coined by Vice Admiral Stockdale. He was a prisoner in the Hanoi Hilton. It's called the Stockdale Principle. The Stockdale Principle is this. It was actually developed and confirmed by Stockdale, but written about in the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. Jim Collins asked Stockdale how he dealt with the horrible situation they were in as a POW, beaten 20 times at least. He was the commander he was the oldest or the highest ranking prisoner. He had figured out a way to communicate with the other prisoners through tapping, but they consistently beat him. Sometimes he had himself beaten so that he wouldn't have to go on video and say things that weren't true. All kinds of horrible things. It was awful. It was dark. It felt like on the verge of death for everybody. Jim Collins asks, how did you survive this hopeless situation? He said, I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but that I would prevail in the end. Asked about who did not make it out, he says this, oh, that's easy. The people that didn't make it out were the optimists. They were the ones who said, we are going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. Then they'd say, well, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, we're going to be out by Thanksgiving. And then Thanksgiving would come and go. And then we'd come around to Christmas again. And Stockdale writes or says that they died of a broken heart. Stockdale goes on, this is a very important lesson. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you cannot afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. Let me say that again. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you cannot afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. See, one of the realities of the end of the story that we read about Jesus is he was dead. He was crucified, dead, and he was buried. It's true. One of the brutal facts right now in our nation is that we are in a crisis. We have a racial crisis. We have a violent crisis happening in many of our cities. We have a pandemic. It's a brutal reality. But here's what I know. That at the end of the story, we have a God that can turn this around. I would like to give us a word. It's not the word optimism. It's not the word optimist, because an optimist, I guess, characteristically doesn't face the reality. It just hopes. The word is this: I'm a hopetimist. I'm a hopetimist. Hope is the confident expectation that God will. The hopetimist is a person that has the promise of the end of the story that's based in the hope that God will. I'm a hopetimist. I don't know how we're going to get out of this. I don't know how it's going to end for us, but here's what I know. That in this story and in every story where God has his people in a ditch, in a grave, in a horrible situation, God creates something beautiful out of it. At the core of my being, because hope is the confident expectation that God will, at the core of my being, I'm a hopetimist. I have placed my hope in God, and he will create the end of the story into something beautiful. When you go visit with people today, when you go visit to people this afternoon, remember that you too can be a hopetimist. You can place your hope in the confident expectation that God will and anticipate a beautiful end to the story. Have a great day.